Hi, I'm Dan Prevette. I'm the writer and performer of Missionary Positions, a solo show at the Hollywood Fringe. If you want to learn a little bit more about it, go ahead and watch the rest of this interview. I think I first fell in love with theater a little bit late in the game, to be honest. I mean, I feel like a lot of people who get into theater start from a very young age or even in high school. I didn't get into theater until I was in college. And a part of that was because of my upbringing, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a bit. But I went to a very, very small, insulated, tiny high school. We had no theater program, no live productions or performances of any kind. So when I was in high school, what I first fell in love with was stand-up. Stand-up comedy was an accessible stylistic medium that seemed innately approachable. Like it seemed there was something, call it the naivete of youth. There was something about watching a stand-up where something in my young mind was like, I could do that. It wasn't like a movie. Like I was a kid who loved movies, loved storytelling, but movies were clearly expensive and inaccessible. But stand-up was akin to what I saw people doing fairly regularly. So when I got to college, I knew at that point, 18, 19, I already had this desire of, I want to get on stage and I think I would like to try to do a play. There was something as a movie lover, I knew that even though I had very little knowledge or experience around theater, I knew that plays were, for lack of a better term, the playground for actors. I knew that that was where most actors began. So when I was in college, I auditioned my freshman year for a number of productions. I did not make any of them, which at the time really, really hurt my heart. But in hindsight, is probably the best decision. I had no idea what I was doing. And the first play that I was in when I was 19, I think I was a sophomore. I played Lenny in Of Mice and Men. So I'm a very big man. I'm 6'7", and I like kind of I'm somewhere in the 270 to 280 category. I'm very physically large. So I was lucky in that only a very specific size person can really effectively play Lenny in Of Mice and Men. I think that was a very easy approach. But I was also really taken with the fact that it seemed like Steinbeck had very carefully written a character that was not made to be played as a caricature, but was made to be played in a very innocent, childlike way. And I think as a big man, there was something about that just seemed like a really fun opportunity to play very starkly against type. And I think I was just in the right place at the right time at a small college. So I was, a physically big fish in a metaphorically small pond. When did I fall in love with writing? I struggled a lot as a student in school when I was especially young. I had a really, really hard time focusing. Now it's really quite popular to be neurodivergent or to be diagnosed with late stage ADHD. I don't want to say popular, but it's at least in the conversation. It's talked about in a way that it didn't used to be. I'm 34. So when I was in school, I think the only people who were given formal diagnoses were the furthest end of any kind of neurodivergent spectrum. I was not far enough at the end of that spectrum to be diagnosed, but I struggled enough with neurodivergence that I couldn't focus in class. I couldn't focus on assignments. I had a very, very hard time with any sort of analytical work, which most of elementary and middle school is. I couldn't do math. I couldn't do science. And I really struggled in English because English was mostly at that time the study of grammar, figuring out how to write properly. And I just could not wrap my head around it. And it wasn't until I was in sixth grade and I took a drama class in my middle school. And it was my drama teacher, Miss Caruth, who I've since reached out to as an adult. And Miss Caruth was the first teacher I had who said, you're actually pretty good at writing. You should keep doing this. And I think I said, I'm really bad at English. And she said, well, I didn't say English. I said writing. And I think that's the kind of magical work that a teacher can do to really kind of spark something in a student, because I had no idea that there was a difference. And as soon as somebody told me, you're pretty good at writing, that became the way that I got myself through everything in school. I was never going to be a good math student, but I could average out my grade point average by being an effective writer. So I think I learned that I had a knack for words, certainly in high school. When it became an obsession, though, was probably in college when I really, really fell in love. I went to school and I actually studied filmmaking. So I studied directing and screenwriting. And I fell in love with writing scripts. And then when I moved to Los Angeles, that continued as I started doing live comedy and live performance. Obviously, writing was a big part of that. But to be perfectly honest, I think for a long time, I misdiagnosed myself as an actor. I think that I incorrectly believed that I was an actor through and through. I was a performer. I could be given a script and I could do something unique with it. I could get on stage and I could perform comedy. But there was something about being a writer that seemed like I wasn't special enough or I wasn't talented enough. And unfortunately, I think I held on to that belief for far too long. I had no idea you could really just decide that you were a writer as soon as you started writing. That came much later. I floundered in that delusion of, well, I like write sometimes, but I'm not a real writer for most of my 20s. Really, it was as I started exploring solo theater, which I think was the perfect combination of my time on stage doing comedy, my passion for film, which very naturally led to sort of multimedia expression, and the fact that I did love doing stage work. I loved being on stage when I was doing plays in college. These all kind of like came together in like, oh, solo theater is the perfect cocktail of everything that I love. And at its core is I have to express my story through writing. And it was the first time that I genuinely fell in love with the idea of being a writer first and foremost, being a writer before I was an actor, being a writer before I was a performer. And I would say that now I certainly consider myself a writer more than I consider myself an actor. And I would generally choose to write. I really don't I don't audition for commercials or anything anymore. But I do work as a writer. So it is absolutely an obsession at this point. I think the theater experience is unique and important because it's uniquely human in a way that actually transcends most of modern conventional entertainment. So we have only had movies for about 100 years. We've only had TV for about 60. We've only had phones for about 10 in the way that we're using them now to view like content. But we have had theater for thousands of years. And I'm not breaking the mold by saying that. I just think that it really speaks to something that is deeply human. I had the experience of putting my show on in February of 2020. I put my show on live at the very end of February. The world shut down on account of COVID within 2 weeks. And then in May of 2020, I did a completely digital performance. I performed in an empty theater into a camera to be broadcast to people's laptops and TVs around the country. I technically still did the same show. I said all the same words. I delivered everything more or less the exact same. But it could not have been a more different experience than having and feeling an audience there. I honestly think that if COVID did nothing but teach all of us how precious one another's company is, it is so precious to be in the presence of another human being, whether it be in person. I think now we have all learned to conduct ourselves, over Zoom. We're all fairly used to this at this point. and we're all much better at it than we were when the pandemic started. I cringe at how clumsily I handled like job interviews or happy hour game nights over Zoom. But now I am so grateful for the opportunity to physically be with other people. And whether I'm watching a show, experiencing the tangible tension of like, this is live, this is happening right now. There's no editing, there's no cutting away. There's nothing is going to remove me from this experience. I am fully pulled in. And as a performer, that is such an enticing challenge to me of like the audience cannot click away and they cannot swipe. They cannot swipe to the next thing. It's just me. And I have to keep them engaged and interested. And that has maybe never been harder in history, but it's so satisfying as an audience member and as a performer when you're actually able to do it, I think. So that's a very roundabout way of answering that question. But I think live storytelling, it goes back to us being around campfires and in caves. It goes back to us communicating the deepest part of who we are. And I think there's something innately uncomfortable about it, but that discomfort is not bad. That discomfort is exciting. The reason I love solo theater goes back to my inspiration in getting into theater in the first place. So I will say that in regards to the subject of my show has a lot to do with my very conservative evangelical upbringing. I was raised incredibly fundamentalist Christian, and I'm happy to get into that more. But one thing that I did not realize about that upbringing until I was quite a bit older was that I had the benefit pretty much every single Sunday of watching somebody get on stage and perform some kind of show, whether they were delivering a story about their life, or they were delivering some kind of message that had a point, or they were trying to achieve some kind of objective. My dad was a missionary, so quite frequently his objective was to tell a story on stage that was so moving and so captivating, the audience felt compelled to donate money so that we could continue doing missions work. That's like that's a very formula-driven kind of marketed, it's almost like a marketing formula. But I was really fortunate to watch people do it with very sincere heart and conviction. It never really felt like it was put on. But as I got older, I realized how much of it really is a craft. So watching a pastor get on stage and just talk for 30 to 45 minutes, giving their life story. And I always remembered the funny ones. I remembered the dramatic ones. I remember the ones with jokes that were peppered through. I remembered when somebody told a crazy story about their childhood or told a wild story about a conversion experience. That really stuck with me in a way that the guy just reading from the Bible and telling me how to live my life, that never stuck with me. That never resonated. So in a way, I think as solo theater sometimes reminds me of that dynamic where you want to connect with an audience in a really honest way. Particularly the kind of solo theater I do is direct address. I don't use a fourth wall. Not yet. I haven't. But I speak directly to the audience because I'm influenced by live comedy. So in doing that, there is a challenge of needing to keep them connected. It's almost akin to having a conversation with them. They're just waiting a really, really long time to talk. And I have to make it very, very worth their time to sit and listen. But hopefully, if I've done my job right, when I'm done talking, they have plenty of responses. They have plenty of things to say back. So I can't really speak on behalf of solo theater where there is not a fourth wall, where you are in a conceptualized world and you are playing every single character and the audience is not there. In some respect, that feels absolutely terrifying to me because I would much rather address the audience-shaped elephant in the room. Because I've never done that, I don't know if that would be harder than doing a conventional play, but I can say that I did a conventional play in college one time. I did Enemy of the People. It just occurred to me that that was a very well-known play that plenty of people would have heard of. I did Enemy of the People, and I played the character of can't remember his name, but the character of the sea captain, who has all of like 7 lines, but he's on stage a lot. So I spent most of that show sitting and listening. I didn't really like have to do a whole lot. I just had to believably sit there and listen. When you're the only one on stage, even if you are sitting and listening, you have to be doing something interesting enough to be compelling the audience through like what you're doing. And it's all on you. There is no rest. There's no break. There's no going backstage to get a sip of water or collect yourself. You have to really, really be present and in the moment. And doing solo theater is more exhausting than anything I've ever done in a conventional show. But it's also a completely different experience whatsoever. And I think conventional theater, if I miss anything of conventional theater, it's the creative collaboration of there are times where you are genuinely sitting and listening to another character and having to be truly in that scene and be a different person. That is a unique challenge that I have not experienced in solo theater in the same way. There's so many different kinds of solo theater too. I mean, solo theater can either, well, there's versions where you are just playing every character. There is a fourth wall. You don't break the fourth wall. And you do have to be so convincingly good that the audience suspends their disbelief. It takes so much craft and skill to help the audience suspend their disbelief. As a direct address performer who, frequently in the show, I will address the audience and then I will go into a scene. So my show is written in vignettes. So I directly address the audience and then I go into a scene where I'm maybe having a conversation. Then I'm back out to the audience. So I'm giving the audience and myself these moments of reprieve. I'm giving both of us kind of like a break. And I think of it a little bit like when you're in a conversation with somebody right in front of you, you don't just stare at them like unblinkingly. You kind of like look away for a second. You consider your thought and then you come back and then you're considering this and, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm listening. That's really cool. Okay. So then you kind of like are giving yourself and them mental moments to catch themselves. And I feel like in really, really great non-fourth wall breaking theater, you are taking all of the weight off of the audience. They are not obligated to engage with you at all. You are trusting that they will, but that is inherently scary to me personally. I first heard about the Hollywood Fringe Festival by way of the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. Obviously, the grandparent of them all. I had heard about the Edinburgh Fringe Festival when a number of years ago, I actually got to go to Edinburgh for not the Fringe. I went for Hogmanay, which is their New Year's Eve celebration. And I just spent the night in Edinburgh meeting people, and people that I happened to talk to in pubs that night mentioned like, oh, you got to come back for the Fringe. And I had never heard of the Fringe. I had no idea what it was. This was probably 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago. I just never heard of it. And they were like, you got to come back for the Fringe. The Fringe is wild. It's so great. If you're ever going to come back for that. And I started looking into it. And then I realized that there were these fringes all over the world. And I probably heard about Hollywood Fringe truly. I mean, it must have been at least 5 years ago. But I was going to do the Hollywood Fringe in 2020 and the world had other plans. So yeah, I've known about the Hollywood Fringe for a number of years. Having never been to any other fringes, what I have experienced at the Hollywood Fringe is not only an incredibly friendly and open amalgamation of performers, but just a massively diverse selection of what you can do on stage. I really love the notion that nothing is off limits. You can do whatever you want. And because it's open to anybody, if you rent a space and put on the production of it, you can get on stage and do anything you can imagine. And I love that over the course of the Fringe, I'm going to get to see solo shows and ensemble shows. I'm going to get to see shows that are absurdist, shows that are grounded in reality, drama, comedy, things that really defy logic and explanation. I watched a man inflate a Bosu ball on stage the other night. Like, that is something that I don't think you would see at anything but a Fringe festival. And that's why they're so special. And that's why they attract such huge crowds. And I think there's also the promise with a Fringe. There's this hope or this faith that, like, you'll get to see the spark of something that catches fire. And I think that really pulls a lot of people in. I had the idea for a concept called Missionary Positions for a long time, which I originally had only conceived of as a book. I had planned on writing a memoir about my life as a evangelical missionary kid. I knew in talking to people throughout my experience, I'll go back quickly and I'll say this. When I started doing stand-up, I had a number of experiences when I was really young, when I was in my early 20s, where I would get on stage and I would tell jokes about different parts of my life, or I would make jokes about being really big or really tall or whatever. And I would make all these jokes. And then I would go have conversations with people and I would start talking to them about my upbringing. And every once in a while, somebody would be like, why don't you talk about this? And I was just like, oh, I don't know. I didn't think it was interesting to other people. But I think the truth is I just didn't know how to talk about it. When I was in my early 20s, I didn't have the taste or the craft or the sense of self, the sense of confidence to confidently approach my own story with any kind of artistic point of view. That took time to develop as I performed in other ways over the course of my 20s. Like a lot of people in their late 20s, the thing that forced me to write the show, I think, was ultimately an existential crisis. I had been pursuing fairly traditional acting in Los Angeles for a long time as a commercial actor. I had done a number of independent projects, indie films, web series, but I really was not gaining any kind of traction as a performer. And I was very quickly losing passion and steam for continuing to be an actor. Despite the encouragement and love of a lot of really good friends and other creative people that I admired and respected, I was just very quickly losing hope in myself being able to make any kind of artistic life for myself. I decided to leave my agency and stop acting when I was about 29 years old, which I believe was the right decision. And it also left me with this point of like, well, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do with my life? Because I'm a bartender and I'm 29. So there's quite possibly a lot of years left to live and I don't know what to do with them. And this idea of writing this memoir, Missionary Positions, kind of returned to me and was like, well, maybe you should really give writing a try. You've never really tried to be a writer. And honestly, I made a post. I made a joking post on social media about, I'm going to start writing my tell-all memoir about my missionary upbringing, Missionary Positions. And my now director commented underneath it and said, you should consider doing this as a show. And it was really that comment that was like, oh, yeah, I guess that's allowed. I guess I don't need anybody to hire me to do that. And it would be way shorter than writing a book. So, okay. And I met with her and I started talking to her and developing the process with her. And it very naturally started to grow out of that. Once I started watering the idea of like Missionary Positions as a solo show, it took root and started to grow naturally. Missionary Positions is my autobiographical story. My name is Dan. I'm a recovering evangelical. Um, I was born to parents who were already committed to become Christian missionaries. Very quickly after I was born, we moved to Bangkok, Thailand. We then lived in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. We lived in Bucharest, Romania for a time in my high school years. And I lived in America for a few years in there just to keep me relatable. The subject of the show has mostly to do with fundamentalist religiosity, fundamentalist Christianity, and the effects that that can have on a young life. The subtitle of the show is Missionary Positions, a recovering Christian's guide to getting lost, because I was raised with such a strong distinction between people being saved or people being lost. And the show is really about my personal discovery and my moving away from fundamentalist religion and away from conservative evangelicalism, away from Christianity as I knew it at all, and becoming lost. And in becoming lost, ultimately finding a sense of freedom and spiritual depth beyond anything that had ever been presented to me while I was strictly Christian. I had to do this show at Hollywood Fringe Festival because you only get one first Fringe. You only get to do Fringe for your first time one time. And I wrestled with insecurity and imposter syndrome and all manner of everything that we struggle with as artists. Should I do it? Am I good enough to do it? Can I afford it? Is it a good idea? And ultimately, I just had to say, if I don't do this, I think I'm going to regret it. I'm going to regret not stepping up with this piece of work that I have genuinely worked so hard on and I'm genuinely very proud of. If I don't step up to the plate with this thing and say, I'm just going to give this my best shot. I'm going to take a crack at this and I'm going to give it my best because I think it's worth the effort. I think I'm worth the effort and I think this show is worth the effort. And I want to do my first Fringe. Now, some might argue that your first Fringe maybe should be the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. But for me, the Hollywood Fringe is 100% where my first Fringe has to be because I've spent my entire early adulthood in Los Angeles. I've been in LA since I was 22. I have had some of the most pivotal events of my life. My entire performance career has been here. I have so many memories with artists and actors and directors and writers. I have struggled and suffered and been broke so many times in this city. And like it, love it, hate it, or leave it, like Los Angeles is in my blood and in my bones. And Los Angeles is actually a fairly large character in my show because it represents this sort of like hero's journey. Character comes home. I was born in Anaheim. The show has a circular motion of me returning to Los Angeles. This is where my entire creative career has been. It would be, frankly, I would be an imposter doing Fringe anywhere else first. Because this is my creative home. I am really, really fortunate to have a really, not just very talented group of creatives behind this show, but an exceptionally supportive and emotionally available group of creatives behind this show with me. Solo theater is not at all a solo endeavor. I compare it a little bit to one of my favorite documentaries ever is Free Solo about Alex Honnold free climbing El Capitan. While Alex Honnold does ultimately climb El Capitan by himself, the whole arc of the story is about all of the people around him who help him do it and make it possible. And that's a little bit what solo theater feels like. In the end, you get on stage by yourself and you have to stand and deliver on your own, but nobody gets to that point alone. And I've been really, really fortunate. My director, Jessica Lynn Johnson, is a fantastic director. not only is she a brilliant director technically, and not only does she have an incredible eye for design, lighting, she's got a great sense of blocking and how to keep a solo performance moving, create cinematic moments in a solo show so that it remains engaging, visceral, and frankly, at times, like visually stunning, all of which I could not have brought to the table at all. Not only does she do all of that, but Jessica also has a really profound gift for being a um, being a supportive and emotionally astute vessel for people doing this work. This can be very, very frightening, triggering, vulnerable, creative work. And it can feel very isolating. And I think I am fortunate to have found a director like Jessica who it's not all just about like get up and deliver. There are times where she recognizes a performer might need to like process some emotions. She recognizes when a performer is like, I'm really struggling with this. I'm really in my head about this. This is not working. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I don't know how to make this work. And she doesn't simply say like, this is the blocking, like do what I'm telling you to do. She's like, okay, let's talk a little bit about what's coming up for you in this moment. She's very, very connected as a director with the fact that a solo show, particularly an autobiographical solo show, is coming from a really deep place. And there's going to be junk that comes up with that, and you can't just push it to the side. The processing it is a part of the creative process, and she's great at facilitating that. I kind of call her like my creative or my story Sherpa, because I'm climbing the mountain, but she's doing a lot of heavy emotional lifting to help me get there. Some of her cohorts are Heather Dowling has been an incredible support, like such a great, a fantastic performer herself, but also a very, very talented director in her own right. And just a really wise person to be able to talk about solo theater with. I have an array of multimedia elements in my show. So my friends who have made music, I begin the show with a quick video edit to sort of the intro video edit to my show, which is a short clip. It's about a minute long. It sort of is designed to invite the audience into a headspace that I need them to be in, because I need them to shake the world outside of the theater. I need them to get out of their lives. And if I just walk out on stage, no cold open, nothing, then there's a bit of an adjustment period. Or I can put this video edit up on the screen and I can pull them into a mindset of like, okay, we're entering a different world now. My friend who put that together is a brilliant editor named Kyle Tai. Brilliant editor. He put it together perfectly. He had to walk a fine line of pulling perfect clips and putting it together with a sense of humor, and he nailed it. My friend Colton Simmons created a piece of music for the end of the show that needed to be very emotionally resonant and needed to be very uplifting and inspiring, but also needed to simulate the emotions that we would sometimes get as young kids in church. So it was a very specific task, and he nailed that. Obviously, the QLab design, the tech, all of the sound design. I've been really, really fortunate to work with people who not only have been talented in their own way, but have really, really understood my vision and bent over backwards to accommodate that. What do I want the audience to get out of the play? My hope is that my audience will leave Missionary Positions feeling a broader sense of hope, a broader sense of peace, that no matter where they are in life, they are not lost, and they are perhaps exactly where they need to be. I want them to leave with a sense of community and with a sense that no matter what they're going through, they're not going through it alone. I want people to leave talking about certain more controversial themes in the show, and I want people to leave repeating the jokes that they like the best. The thing I'm most looking forward to about performing at the Hollywood Fringe is the opportunity to perform in front of audiences that have no reason to know me or my show. I'm looking forward to getting in front of a group of people, many of whom are performers and creatives themselves, and really getting my show, which is about a very, very specific niche portion of the American culture, and getting that up in front of people who might have no history with it whatsoever, who might only know evangelicals based on what they have seen on the news or in TV shows and movies. I am looking forward to seeing what humor works. I'm looking forward to seeing what pieces of the story resonate and land. And I'm looking forward to seeing if people who have vastly different backgrounds from mine are able to connect with it and hopefully take a piece of it with them. I think the thing that will surprise the audience the most is that while I certainly pull no punches in regards to the evangelical church as I knew it growing up, and I am a lover of really, really letting conservative American Christianity have it. And I really have no qualms about offending that particular tribe because that is the tribe that raised me. So I feel that is my birthright. But I think the thing that will surprise the audience the most is that it is not a hateful, angry show. And I do not intend to leave anybody with a notion of rage or indignation or a desire for vengeance. I think the most surprising thing about it is that I am authentically somebody who believes that I did get well and truly lost. I'm a backslider. I have fallen away from the Christianity I was raised with. Many of my peers from my childhood would not consider me a Christian, but I still have a very, very open, spiritual, and frankly, theological orthodoxy that allows me to engage with the world as a spiritual person in a very, very open and honest way. People should go to my play at the Hollywood Fringe Festival because I think it's going to be unlike anything else there. I think the subject matter is going to be fairly unique. I think the way that I tackle it is fairly unique. And because I think it's a really, really interesting, unique, and often hilarious and heartbreaking show. I think it encompasses a wide range of human emotions that, regardless of upbringing or spiritual inclination, it can be related to by pretty much anybody. And I think there's something in it for everybody. And I think there are things that people will find funny no matter what. I think that ultimately it's an engaging show that will leave people asking questions as they drive home. People should go to the Fringe Festival because you'll probably never have a better opportunity to see a more eclectic blend of live performance. And you should see live performance because what you see live will never be replicated in the exact same way again. And what you see live will stick with you. You may tell that story about that night at a live show or watching live theater. You may carry that story with you for the rest of your life, sharing it at cocktail and dinner parties. You have no idea what's going to happen. You have no idea how it might. Sorry, there's sirens outside. I don't know if you can hear that. You should see live theater at the Hollywood Fringe because you have no idea how one show might change your life. And you have no idea who you might see or what might happen after that. This is a front row seat to see some really, really special stuff. Events like the Hollywood Fringe are important because art is important. There is a quote that I'm not going to try to quote perfectly now because I can't remember who said it and I'll butcher it, but art gives us reasons to live. Art is the thing that creates meaning, and more specifically, story. Story is the mechanism by which we understand our lives. There's no clear answer for why we are here, for what we are supposed to do, but story gives us context for painful things, for heartbreak, for romance, for spiritual disillusionment. It gives us a container that we can use to navigate our lives, no matter how painful or bizarre it gets. And we need the community's support because, frankly, creating art in a country like America and in a world like ours is an expensive endeavor. And we need the support of art-loving people, theater-loving people, to help us facilitate the work that we're passionate about creating, to share some of the cost of creating the stories that we tell ourselves. Because ultimately, we all need these stories in order to get through the good times, the bad times. These stories are the things that fuel us, and we're all in it together. So we should all be supporting one way or another. How did I fund the play? I have largely funded the play through my own personal financing. I allocated a certain portion of my budget. I have a full-time job. I work as a professional writer. I work as a marketer and a copywriter. So this is a side hustle. This is a passion project, but it's something that I really deeply care about and deemed was worthy for me to invest my own time and money in. Really, if people want to be involved and if people want to help, the best thing they can do is come see the show at the Hollywood Fringe on June 4th, June 16th, or June 24th. I would love to have them at I'd love to have you at any one of the shows. And if you feel so inclined, I do have a ticketing option on my site where, if you like, you can pay slightly higher than the going ticket rate. If you feel blessed, I wanted to offer tickets at a lower cost for people who might be financially burdened or financially strapped. I don't want money to be a reason that nobody comes to the show. So I'm not looking to make money on the Hollywood Fringe. But if people feel so inclined and they would like to see the show, they can purchase one of those tickets at a slightly higher price point, and that will go towards helping others who maybe don't have that option. And it'll go towards helping me continue to do the show however that presents itself next. My hopes and dreams for this production are far and wide. Of course, I feel like I have all of the stereotypical hopes and dreams, but my very, very tangible hope and dream for this show is I would love to do a tour of Missionary Positions through a pretty good portion of the American Bible Belt. I would love to take this show to the Midwest, to the South, to the parts of the country where I have lived and where so many of my friends have lived or still live, where evangelical Christianity is still such a prominent spirituality, and honestly, probably always will be. And the show is not about dissolving that or destroying that. My hope is that I can bring the show to other people like me who were disillusioned and broken and hurting, and offer a little bit of encouragement and a little bit of inspiration and maybe a fun, entertaining night of theater that leaves them saying, I'm going to be okay. It's going to be okay. We're all going to be okay. My name's Dan Prevette, and I am performing Missionary Positions during the month of June at the Hollywood Fringe Festival. You can see my show at the Zephyr Theatre on June 4th, June 16th, and June 24th. Tickets are available on the Fringe website, and I'd love to see you there. Your soul is fine. Save your seat.